All right. Hello, everybody. I'm here today with Jessica Eve. Jessica is a spiritual emergency coach, writer, and video creator who sheds light on the potentially dangerous shadows and blind spots of self-negating non-duality and Neo-Advaita. So, Jessica, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, great to be here with you.
Me too.
Um, Yeah. So you've been on a fascinating journey of diving deep into non duality, discovering its shadows firsthand, and then finding your way to something more life affirming. I'd love to start by asking, could you share a concise version of your non duality story with us?
Yay, I'll do my best on that one. It's never easy to put it all into a nutshell, but I will do my best. And I guess I will say, just for anyone listening who would maybe want to get like a more full picture of it, maybe you can put a link somewhere to the interview I did on Boot at the Gas Pump, because I think that's the conversation where I talk the most about my actual personal experience. So that would be like a deep dive into it.
Yeah, that was a great interview. Can definitely link to that. Yeah.
I'm glad that you got a chance to see it. So okay, let's try the nutshell version. So let's see, I'm 38 now. So about 14 years ago, it's crazy to think it's that long ago, is when I started kind of getting into um what I now consider to be something I would call Neo-Advaita, but also fine to just say, non-duality, if you will. We'll unpack more of that later, I'm sure, what we mean by that. Um, Starts with, just simply books like Michael Singer's The Untethered Soul, The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle. Then from there, it kind of goes into folks like Adyashanti, Jeff Foster, Rupert Spira, etc. Um, but really, I would just say that when I came to these teachings, I wasn't looking for something called enlightenment, or hadn't even really thought about, the notion of spirituality, but I was looking to reduce my suffering from, everything from a very obsessive mind to kind of extreme rumination, and definitely on the extreme end of uh chaotic thinking, if you will. And then also some other things like really having like this deep sense of always trying to get somewhere else that I'm not, and always wanting things to be better, and then getting to that place and it's never what I thought it was. And that the fulfillment of desire always seemed to sort of not live up to the expectation of it, and all of these sort of conundrums that these voices were kind of affirming as sources of suffering, and then giving me this very kind of surprising and mysterious solution, which was something to the extent of like, that no self, no suffering. Or you need to on one hand you have like the self-negation stuff, which is, the source of all the suffering is you. And that really resonated, of course. Like, I'm already like pretty uh cynical about my mind at this point in time, and blaming myself for everything. If only I could be different, and that kind of thing. So it really resonated with me that, like, of course you're the problem, you have to get out of the way. So if you get rid of the one who blank, that's the solution. The one who's suffering, the one who wants, the one who's thinking this, that, and the other. And of course, the whole kind of new paradigm of like, you're not a person, you don't really exist, it's all just this story. And, once you can see that, then you're free. And that notion of freedom from, all of my kind of mental chains was, kind of irresistible to me at that point. And I just went in with it. There was really no hesitation, or really, I would say, any like big fears around it. It just felt really natural. Like, okay, yeah, this is it, and it's happening, and I'm seeing through all these illusions, and Jessica never existed, and how utterly hilarious, but how utterly hilarious and freeing, and how did I not know this sooner, kind of thing. So sorry, I'm already like, oh my God, I'm missing so many things. But let's just say, okay, so there's that. And then the other part of it, which you and I kind of started talking a little bit about on Substack, was then there's the whole sort of like renunciation piece, which at the time I wouldn't have necessarily recognized was something as something renunciate, like renunciate values, if you will, which was like stop wanting, stop desiring, not just, get rid of the one who desires, but if you're suffering because you desire, just stop desiring. Like, stop seeking anything. You're suffering from seeking. It wasn't like seek differently or seek in a healthier way. It was the end of seeking, the end of this, the end of that. No more desire, no more preferences. Stop interpreting, stop telling stories, stop thinking. All of it was sort of like, it all has to go, like all of these things that are very natural to our humanity but can also cause a great deal of suffering was kind of like just abstain from those things. And that also made a lot of sense. And when I could kind of let go of those things, and follow the teachings and the meditations and the prompts to get to these kind of states of like desirelessness and what I would have called at some point like kind of radical inner peace and contentment and not feeling like I need anything outside myself. Because that was a whole nother big piece, was like, this is about not needing anything except for what you can source sort of like from within or from the moment. Like, stop needing, desiring, attaching, clinging, or having anything that you need to source from outside of yourself for happiness, and then you're free. So I would say I experienced something to that extent. And along this path, it just went sort of deeper and deeper into the sort of ego death endeavor, what is called, let's say, ego dissolution, and really kind of, yeah, really dismantling and dissolving like my firsthand personal sense of self. And I got to a point where like I was experiencing myself as, you know, people refer to it in all these different ways. What I was comfortable calling, pure awareness, or this sort of like background to the foreground of like the illusory self, just sort of the open, infinite, boundless space or amorphousness that's prior to everything else, or this ground of being that's before manifestation and all of that. Or at some point in the journey I would have said, that I'm nothing and I'm no one, and then it would have been like I'm everything and I'm everyone. Like, the language shifted, but it was always this sort of shift from being a person in the world to, in some places in the journey, it was just sort of to like just no longer existing in that firsthand experience of just sort of complete dissolution from sort of the scene in the moment, yet life is still happening. To then, there's some of the, I would say some of the shifts were more of like the self is still there and doing things, but I'm sort of an observer to that, and I'm not that. And I would just say that, like, over a couple of years, that erosion of my sense of self, which just kind of became stronger and stronger and became more of sort of like my automatic sense of things, that very sort of like impersonalization, if you will, um, had led to all of these extraordinary, positive things like that. Like I said, of course, that feeling of like emancipation from all of these mental chains and all of this. And um, of course, a lot of these ways of experiencing things could involve extreme feelings of like bliss and peace. And some of those things I would say were more in like a meditative context. And sometimes it was just walking down the street kind of thing. Um, but what I started to see over time, because I would say that this whole sort of self negation experience had really, it changed everything, just like people say, like there's a before and an after. And for a while, it felt like this was absolutely like the holy grail. This was, this meant freedom forever and the best possible thing that ever could have happened. But it took time to see the shadow side. of what was happening and the ramifications of it that I experienced, and I think a lot of times don't necessarily show up until further down the road. So I started to see things like, everything from like going blank in my mind when I'm trying to have conversations, or finding that I'm just like, everything relational just kind of felt like exhausting. Like, why are we talking? Why are we adding anything to the silence? And what is like, what is the point of any of this? Like, everything's perfect as it is, and talking and thinking and asking questions, it's all just meaningless, ego trip stuff that starts to make pretty much everything that you're doing uh, with other people and in engaging with, especially obviously in conversation, just, there's a nihilistic point to it, but that doesn't feel very good, to be feeling like you're pushing yourself to like hold up this illusion or this delusion that isn't real. And it's like, I'm just pretending to be this person that's just like this dead character. Like, this is not comfortable. And that's one thing. I definitely would say that like the biggest shadow side for me, there's more. Like, there were some things starting to happen with like, um this was maybe more towards when it led to like the spiritual emergency level. But also, by the way, am I taking up too much time?
No, this is great. Yeah, this is
Okay.
great. Feel welcome to keep going.
Also, feel free if you want to like jump in
Mm.
to like in anything. But I think I'm getting towards wrapping up the nutshell. So, um, right. So yeah, things like yeah, these things that I'm saying, like that kind of like nihilism that could set in, that feeling of, and there is an extreme feeling of isolation walking through the world and believing that everyone in the world except for you and like a select few other people, like, the non-dual teachers on YouTube and, the handful of people that are following them, that everyone else is trapped in a delusion. And simply for believing that they are real and that we are real. And so that starts to set in as well. And then it's like, how can I still be around all these people? Like, how can I be in society? How can I have this job? How would I have a family and kids knowing it's all a delusion? Like, this kind of stuff that starts to weigh on you, but it's still like, certainly still felt like all worth it. And like, I'm not questioning whether I want to stay in this path. But then it started to hit me in relationship, and starting to realize the extent to which I had really damaged my ability for intimacy. Um, Not just intimacy, like, oh my God, I'm sorry. I don't know why that suddenly started playing. So intimacy, I would say physical intimacy was a big one, which I was starting to like, uh, during the time that everything I'm talking about now, I had a few relationships, which is also weird because they didn't know that I didn't experience or believe that I really that Jessica was real, or that they were, but it's hard to really unpack like what was going on in that relationship. But um I started to realize the more that like I really sunk into the kind of like disreality and the more sort of like real extreme loss of self, that there was a level that I realized that was like dissociative, because I felt and believed that this body is not what I am. I'm completely other than it. And so when there's physical, contact going on with my body and someone else's body, like, I'm not what's being touched and I'm not what's touching. So there was this very scary moment of like, oh my God, like, I can't really like fully inhabit intimacy, like physical intimacy, or fully enjoy it or fully savor it, or because I'm not able to be touched. I am unreachable now, literally. And so there was this double-edged sword moment of like, oh, so I'm untouchable by a lot of these ways of suffering, and have this sort of invulnerability elixir that has felt amazing in terms of like certain types of suffering, but yet it's turned into something literal where I am beyond touch. And that hit me in a way that was not a bonus, was not something that I had that was great that other people don't. It was a deficit. And it was something that to me started to show me the cracks and to show me the degree to which this had actually been really dehumanizing. And I got to a point where I just started to feel like, and I also realized like a relationship that I'd wanted to be in couldn't go forward. And mainly because I just didn't have enough of, there wasn't enough of anyone on my end of things to hold up this relationship. I mean, you can't really have, I mean, this whole thing really cancels out relationship when you really get down to it. And so that made uh, a relationship just not really possible unless I could just keep sort of pretending all the time that like I care about what we're talking about and all these things. So there's that. Then it starts to get to the point where like I just realized that for all of this, these sort of experiences of like this boundless serenity and certainly things that I had gained that were pretty remarkable. I had really become, from like a humanity perspective, like an empty shell of a human. And on some level, like kind of just like this zombie. Um, and I had started to kind of recognize, that there was something not right in the whole sort of like self abandonment kind of mentality. And I had started kind of reading some other people that were starting to sort of poke holes in the radical self-negation path and started to I guess let's just say when I realized the degree to which I had become this sort of like empty shell zombie subhuman non-entity whatever, uh I started to question everything. I started to wonder about what other pathways there were that were not dehumanizing and that were maybe like, the glorious about them, that were both and not this either or of like, it's either suffer or be a person, or it's either there's no separation whatsoever, or everything's one. Or wait, did I say that right? No, sorry, that it's like either there's oneness after killing separation, rather than like maybe both are can be affirmed in some kind of balance. So I don't know if maybe we stop there because the rest of it is maybe a different chapter of the path that we could go into later.
Sure. Yeah. And that kind of leads toward my next question. So then I assume that you went on a pretty intensive, extensive, arduous journey to kind of reckon with what had happened to you through non-duality and then try to find your way to, something more life affirming. And so to kind of fast forward to where you're at now, after years of doing that, I want to ask, like, what have you arrived at now? How do you now view this right here, this reality that we're currently experiencing?
Yeah, cool. I like that question. So, yeah, 7 years later onwards from that sort of, I would say, kind of like waking up out of that self-negating notion of awakening, um, I experience myself and other people as real again. However, in a different way. So, of course, I know the whole kind of like, oh, she went back to sleep, like she couldn't hack it kind of thing, or, she's back in the matrix now. I wrestled with that for a very long time of like, well, if I find a way to embrace the self as real, then of course I'm going back to sleep. And how could I want that? Like this isn't quite right, but I definitely don't want to go back to that, you know? Um, but I have gotten to a place where I won't go into all the details, but I've gotten to a place where I feel as though on a good day that I have been able to leave the worst of the self-negating sort of mystical paradigms and take some of the best of it so that I don't feel that I've lost what I think were genuinely like the gold of that pathway, that I could siphon out, which for me is a greater sense of awe and wonder and appreciation and connection to mystery, a sense of oneness. But I will say this is a different sort of oneness than what it was back then. I know that I share a lot of things from Tim Freak, and so one of my favorite quotes from this whole journey is that you don't get oneness by erasing yourself. That would be oneness with a hole in it. So I feel as though I've gone from sort of like the oneness of disappearance, where it's kind of like you disappear into everything and then call that oneness, whereas now it's sort of a oneness that I can be a part of as a person, and that's made a major difference. And I would say the other things that I think were rather missing in the more sort of popular self-negating non-duality, which is like more of a heart-centeredness or heartfulness, and a place of like tenderness and a compassion that I think can only be felt when you honor the reality of other people and, their suffering and what they're going through. So a much greater sense of like solidarity with humanity, in a sense that for me is really unifying, of like an interconnection. Um, but just to like quickly get into sort of maybe like the metaphysics of it, because I feel like that's a little bit important, is that when I say that like I experience myself as real again, um, part of what I feel like I always want to put in as like a little bit of a caveat is that what's happened for me is like this shift towards sort of like bridging or like marrying the opposites of like form and formlessness. Or I personally don't resonate with terms like the absolute and the relative anymore, but if I were to use them, marrying those and the transcendent and like the immanent, the beyond and the within, that those things have kind of come together into this, like, not to get like super religious and stuff, but like a holy union, if you will. Um, and so what I experience as the self, and when I have conversations with some people who will say, like, well, don't you get that like you're just pure consciousness or you're just the ground? And so my way that I would sort of express how it is for me now would be whatever you want to call that, like primal ground. I personally don't relate to that as consciousness anymore, but if you do, fine. That, let's say you believe that it's consciousness, then consciousness as a person, not that it's like your consciousness or you're a person, or your consciousness just kind of pretending to be a person or just appearing but not really a person. That like, no, my sense of things now is that I am that, that ground or whatever that has really become a person, and so the universe expressing itself as a real person. And so for me, that has made it feel like uh that for me it's just been like an evolution in my journey, in my understanding, in my like psycho spiritual growth path, has been getting from that, like that either or of like I'm just separate, then I'm just one and I don't exist, to there's separateness and oneness together, and that means there's relationship. And getting to this point that feels more of like a third thing maybe emerged from combining these priorly mutually exclusive opposites, which I talk about a lot. But yeah, so life is relational again. Life is much more obviously relationally rich. And I feel much more comfortable and enthusiastic about engaging and participating in the world. I don't judge myself or shame myself anymore for wanting to express myself, or having desires and sometimes what I might call needs, or interpreting things. And it's become much more about finding a way to have balance, rather than, taking something like, extreme rumination to like, okay, just never have thoughts anymore, to how can I, think differently and think in a healthier way, and take that approach to any of the things that I previously believed in, those paths that I had to just, cut out entirely. Um, So I'll stop there. I know I didn't get to say everything I would have liked, but hopefully that gives us enough to
Yeah,
go
that's
with.
amazing. And I wanted to also ask a little more about Tim Freak because I've really appreciated his work as well. And I know you like the ideas of uni-duality and uni-visual that I believe he originated. And so I'm
Yeah.
curious how those come into play for you and in relation to what you're sharing about how you see things now and what you like about those concepts.
That's really cool question. You're really good at questions, by the way. And I appreciate that. So, yeah, I first want to say because I do share things from Tim Freak a lot, and I've done a lot of YouTube conversations with him. And I always want to put out the caveat now because something for me that I've become really sensitive to is sort of like the whole like ultimate truth thing. And so I want to say up front that I don't agree with everything that Tim Freak puts forth. There's some pretty big points of disagreement that I have with him. And he knows that. But he's somebody who's been instrumental in me, I would say, like coming back to life and getting excited to be a real person again in this, interconnected world. And so, I mean, I think that one of the reasons, I mean, I know one of the reasons why we've connected so much and he's mattered to me so much is because when I was coming out of the self-negating non-dual stuff, he was still putting out his version of sort of like Nisargadatta's, you are, the world is within you, you are not in the world, you're what the world is within kind of thing. But he was doing it in a way that didn't degrade the individual, but short, but he was always talking about something both and where like there's you are a character in a dream, but don't get rid of that. Like love that character and participate in that character, and the characters are beautiful. And to me that was like, what? Like this is heresy or something. Like it's only ever been talked about in like this degrading, cynical way. That felt like this is so much more me. So I started sort of reading more of his books, and it was like a stepping stone. There were a lot of these sort of stepping stones for me away from that more radical, extreme, either or type of like non-dual perspective towards what I consider now is like what both and means for me. Um, but what fast forward to him sort of revisioning his entire view of things, he has put out this sort of notion of not non-duality but uni-duality, and that really sums up to me what both and means for me, where it's like again that marriage of those two things that are usually seen as polar opposites. So in non-duality, the term that is ruling everything is something that is already like a binary, that's like it's not this. So you have to negate duality to affirm universality or oneness or whatever to uni-duality, so that it's however you want to look at it, of like oneness and separateness co-arise, they coexist, they're intertwined, or I like the notion of like the one as two, or one and two together. So uni-duality really shifted everything for me, being able to kind of conceive of it that way, which then shifted my experience of it. And then uni-viduality, I love so much because it's like I said, like, yes, I've gone back to experiencing myself as individual, you as individual, but at the same time, there's that inherent sort of, that we're two expressions of the universe. Or Tim has sort of eloquently had this sort of vision of like the universe has kind of become conscious of itself as two different individuals. So in relationship. So I love this sense of like oneness, or like I personally don't really like the terms waking up or awakening myself anymore, but I get that they can be useful and people use them. That if there is, that this is a different type of like awakening to oneness where, sorry, I think I lost my train of thought. Right. So it's not that like, the whole waking up to oneness reveals to you there's no one to wake up kind of thing, which I resonated with in the past. Just these are individuals, or we can be individuals who quote unquote wake up to oneness and experience oneness without losing our individuality. And that's an entirely different ball game. It's an entirely different experience. Um, I mean, sometimes I think about it and I'm like, they're worlds away, these two different experiences. But that to me has, like, yeah, completely like redeemed my humanity and relationship and brought in something that feels much better to me in terms of like still getting to have um, something that I would relate to as oneness at the same time that I get to have and like experience and enjoy the beauty of individuality. That works.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Um, and yeah, I felt like saying a couple words about where I'm at and where my journey's led to, because I think there's a lot of synergy between
Love it.
where we find ourselves. And so yeah, I would say currently I'm in a space or a paradigm that I could call all inclusivity or fluidity or multidimensionality. Those are some terms that I like, which are basically like there is this ongoing felt deep sense of wholeness, like a sense of I'm not apart from what is. I'm not apart from the universe. I'm not apart from reality.
Mhm.
I am reality expressing itself as Jordan. And that I find that sense of wholeness with what is really what to me kind of grants this feeling of at homeness, this sense of being at home in reality. I think a lot of people don't really feel at home in reality. So I think that's where a lot of the non-dual awakening stuff can be really beneficial if you can discover that felt
Mm.
sense of wholeness and yes, I belong here and yes, I am this and I
Mm.
can just rest as what is. I find that really beneficial. But
Mhm.
what I've come to see for me is that as far as I see it, reality or what is can express itself in infinite different ways, right? It can express itself through infinite different modes of ways that it can seem to be. There's like countless ways that this can be with itself and ways that this can seem to be. And I would consider a lot of non-duality, they try to take certain modes, certain ways reality can seem to be and ways it can be with itself and say this is the absolute mode. This is the mode that's more true than all the other modes and you just need to get to this mode and stay in this mode and that's kind of the
Right.
carrot on the stick. And so what I've come to see is just like no, that's not the case. That's just another mode that you can play with. And
Yeah.
it's also completely valid to play with a mode of this is a universe that evolved over billions of years and I am the knife's edge of cosmic evolution and we all are and we're all the dancing cosmos, or play with a paradigm of like this is a giant fractal superorganism that is replicating itself almost like an infinite tentacled octopus and we're all tentacles of this one superorganism and we're all microcosms of the macrocosm and just it's just kind of effulging forth as these individuals. Or I can shift or I can play with a paradigm of this is all consciousness and this is all an appearance within consciousness. And I can see that any of those perspectives that if I deeply internalize or deeply play with any of those, they can become experiential for me. I can start experiencing reality that way. And so that's one of the big insights is just like any perspective, any mode that you repeat to yourself and you deeply internalize will tend to become experiential and you will then experience reality that way. And so many people in non-duality, they think, oh, this has become experiential to me. So for me, so that means that it's definitely the absolute truth rather than seeing that they've just deeply internalized another mode and it's become experiential, just like how for a Christian, Jesus Christ often becomes experiential when they deeply believe in him. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that mode is more true or more absolute or more ultimate than any other mode. And I don't negate the sacredness and the revelatory nature of experiences like that. It's like every mode is sacred. Every mode is revealing of new aspects of this infinite dimensional, infinite sided kind of jewel or polyhedron of reality that can look at itself from numberless angles. And so what I've kind of arrived at is this feeling of fluidity where I see that we're all continuously drifting through these modes. Like if you get really subtle with it, you can kind of see that even moment to moment, there's subtle shifts in mood and subtle shifts in perspective and subtle shifts in the environment. And it's almost like we're just continuously drifting for through all these modes, and they're all fully this reality. They're all fully wholeness. They're all fully this. They're all fully what is. And it's completely our right and our birthright to just find our natural center of gravity, our natural flow within these modes, moment to moment, day by day. Just find like what what modes feel good to me, feel right in my heart. They're all fully that. So I don't need to play some of these modes off of other modes and say these are more absolute and ultimate and you need to abide in these over here. It's more like you just have a vast, infinite smorgasbord of infinite ways that reality can be with itself. And they're all pure poetry and they're all beautiful and they all have different kind of trade-offs and advantages or disadvantages and have liberating qualities. And so I now just more so consider myself like a fluid explorer of modes who enjoys drifting through, these numberless modes and finding what feels right for me. And, I'd say at this time, some of the most fundamental things that feel really good for me are fully embracing my humanity, fully embracing that I'm a father and a husband, embracing my wife and my daughter as real beings and holding them in my heart and, you know, truly treasuring the experiences of just weeping, looking into my daughter's eyes and just feeling heart explosive love and feeling for me, it's not I don't really I like not really latching onto or grasping onto any particular kind of metaphysics. I like just kind of letting this wholeness remain a mystery, and I like being able to shift between different kind of metaphysical frames and seeing what that feels like experientially. Yet the important thing for me is just the felt sense of wholeness and how that provides a sense of being home here and being at rest here and being able to just let this flow, just let it be what it is and let it flow and then just enjoy being myself and there's really nothing to do but be you is kind of one of the mantras I like just be yourself. So that's kind of yeah, that gives a sense of where I find myself. I'm curious what that brings up for you.
Wow, just I've found that really like not just refreshing, but just like so like touching and moving because I mean, for me, that is so needed, like that type of perspective and invitation, I would say. Like you said, I love how you called it like a smorgasbord and like a note here and there just so that I could remember what I wanted to say. But I think I want to like jump in first with um the the attitude that you have, which is like I can say that those experiences that I had of just like complete dissolution, for example, that a lot of the non-dual folks make the be all end all of where you have to abide as that pure consciousness, whatever, not a person, etc. That's a valid experience to have. It's a valid perspective to have. It can be profoundly positive or negative. It can be both. There it's a real experience, but that doesn't make it the be all end all. It doesn't make it the ultimate salvation for everyone. It doesn't make it the superior way of being or the most evolved developmental level of human consciousness. I would say far from that. So what you're saying is like being able to like that's the whole thing that like the biggest thing it really feels important to me, and this is a lot of what I've been collaborating with Tim Freak on, is kind of like revisioning that whole notion of like ultimate truth and ultimate states. And the reason for that is exactly what you just like so beautifully expressed, which was like this freedom to explore, like explore the all these different ways that you said reality can manifest, can experience, but like we don't need to. And I fully recognize that some people don't want to explore these different states of consciousness. I'm not saying I'm better than those people, but there are people who are called to do that. Obviously, you and I are such people. Um, and we've found that, the way that we conceive of reality, it could be through trying on a different metaphysical perspective, or learning about this tradition's way of understanding the nature of reality, that when you really internalize those, there's that way in which it opens a doorway to experiencing things differently, and it changes everything. And I think what I most really want to be able to support people in is being able to not get stuck in any. And I say that because in my experience with the self-negating non-duality and the people that I work with and hear from that also, felt at some point trapped in that, there's that feeling that like I'll never be able to experience reality in any other way again, because not just everyone's telling me it's the ultimate truth, but you're really caught in that whole I would say sort of like self-validating loop of like, the ultimate truth that, let's say, you don't exist is just experiential. So I'm going to give you a pointer, you're going to experience it, and once you experience it, then you know that it's self-evident and undeniable and nothing else can be true. Having gone through that whole reasoning, it really feels like it's been locked in as, well, I've seen it now as the ultimate truth. Because I experience it that way, it has to be the ultimate truth, like they're all saying. So how can I go back to something else? Because that's denying the truth, for example. And that's a sticky trap that people can end up in for years. And it's agonizing, to be quite honest. So to be able to just invite people to a different way, which is like, I like to call it like freedom of perception. So it's like to not end up locked in one mode of perception that you don't want to be limited to. But I like what you're saying is that like you're not limited to one or the other. So you get to play with that and then play with that. And that all of those are included in the whole of reality is so different from what's taught in a lot of the non-dual stuff, right? Because it's trying to kind of like shepherd everyone into this sort of absolute dissolution state, or whatever the state is that they're calling it, and sort of like migrate away from anything else and never return to any of those again. And so that freedom, and then I really love what you said, which was like getting to sort of experiment with what feels good for you, so that it's like, a lot of people in non-duality will say that like this doesn't actually feel good, but it's the truth. So I guess I have to just accept it. And I'm going to keep going on this path because I'm being told that this is the ultimate way and whatever, but like actually I don't really like it. That wasn't my experience at first. But I really feel like at this point, like when I would share what I hold as like what I find the most compelling kind of metaphysical viewpoint, that's what I'm choosing, not just because it feels compelling on like a intellectual level, but because it feels the best. What it leads to in my experience is what feels the best and feels the healthiest. And I think that one of the big shifts that we could go through would be to change the criteria that we use when evaluating what spiritual path you want to go down, which teachers, which metaphysical frameworks maybe you're going to hold, whether it's loosely or strongly, not based on whether this is the ultimate undeniable absolute truth, or even whether this is going to be, enlightenment or whatever, to what is actually best for me. And also maybe if you're someone who likes to consider people beyond yourself, what's best for the collective or society or my family or community based on what I value. And that was so missing before. And then I know I'm rambling, but one last thing, because you started out talking about being at home, and that really touches me, because that's one of the other things that shifted, is that like I feel like I belong on earth. I feel like I belong within the bittersweet family of humanity. It can be hard to see humanity as a family, but what I think gets really robbed from people in so much of non-duality is that sense of feeling like you belong in the world. And there's a real glorification of not feeling at home in the world, and a real glorification of being able to be like, I'm not part of this, or like, I'm beyond this all. I don't I don't belong or wanting to belong, or if you do feel like you belong in society, then obviously you're delusional and you're trapped in the matrix. Whereas now it feels to me that it's like, I don't find that to be a spiritual ideal in any way. And I think that there's such a beauty in feeling, and also just from the perspective of like, if you're going to talk about like oneness and non-duality, that's like, if we are everything, then we're a part of everything. But that, like what you said, is that this inclusivity, but I felt that non-duality didn't have inclusivity, so that you are the whole, but somehow you're not a part anymore. Whereas like now it feels like, well, you can be a part and the whole. I don't know how much, if you ever got into like Ken Wilber at all. Um, but he was someone that, and I don't agree with everything he says by any means, but I really liked his whole like part slash whole thing, that like everything can be both a part and a whole, like whole in itself, but then a part of a greater whole. But to be at home in the world, is beautiful, and to feel, I think when you said at home, I think so much of that quote that's so thrown around in non-duality, which is in it but not of it, if you know that. Like the ideal, and that's their view of balance, is like, you don't want to, like, you still want to be able to like operate in the world, but don't be of it. Like don't be really feel like you're a part of it or at home in it. You got to still somehow be, keep it at arm's length or something. And to me, it's like, now it's like I'm in it and I'm of it because I am it. If I am it, then I'm of it, because of it means part of it, and it means belonging. And so to me, it was very tragic to me that I followed that as an ideal, whereas now the in it and of it in a different way. And to me, that has been so much more healthy and beautiful and connective. So I just completely resonate with everything you're saying, and just really happy to have connected with you.
Mm, wonderful. Me too. Um, yeah, I have about 20, 25 minutes left here just to give you an idea. And I want to talk a bit more about some of the shadows of non-duality. We've touched on a lot of them, but I just want to dig a little more into that since that's a big focus of your work. Before I do that, I just want to make a couple points that it feels important to make at some point in this podcast, which for one, I would say, and you've talked about this, that there's no single definition of non-duality, right? And that term is now kind of a catch-all for so many different types of things. And so what we're wrestling with here, or I'd say more of what we're critiquing here, are some of the more radical modern forms of non-duality, Neo-Advaita, self-negating non-duality. Not only modern, though, there are also a lot of ancient traditions that, are almost antagonistic to the world of form. I mean, some of those ancient Indian traditions, they're like, take the view, the body is just a rotting sack of garbage, and this world is just, a suffering pit, and you need to just get the hell out of here at all
Yeah.
costs, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and at the same time, I just wanted to note that there are also ancient and modern traditions that many people would consider non-duality that don't fall into those categories, and that do take a much more humanizing and a much more all-inclusive view. Certain strains of, for example, Vajrayana Buddhism or Zen Buddhism, not all, but some, for example, can take a more like both side of the coins view, and many modern at least quite a few modern speakers as well, I would say, who are often lumped in with non-duality, do take a more all-inclusive approach. And for example, Peter Brown and John Aston would be a couple guys who I really love their work and can highly recommend it to anyone listening. And they've really inspired me, especially Peter has really inspired a lot of what I'm talking about in terms of the all-inclusivity and just like drifting among these numberless modes, and all the modes are fully it, and they're all so radiant and juicy and luscious, and we can appreciate all the modes, and we can just find our natural center of gravity among those modes. And so that was revelatory for me when I heard Peter talking about that. I was like, whoa, this is this feels really good to me and feels like a next step, and like a lot
Yeah.
clicks into place when I explore that. So I want to make that point. If you want to add anything to that,
Yeah, I'm
thumbs up
glad.
on that.
I was looking for that little button that's like raising your hand, but I couldn't find it. I'm really glad that you said that. I think I was in the beginning of all of this that I've been doing, and YouTube and writing. I've usually started out in the beginning being like, okay, when I talk about non-duality, I mean, and then I sort of got over the sensitivity to like knowing that if I say non-duality, it might kind of lump things together that shouldn't be. But it's really important to do that, and I think that I have had such a complicated relationship with that term non-duality. I've gotten to a point where I don't use it anymore, but if we were to really get into it, like I would prefer to sort of like reclaim the word non-duality or like revision non-duality to mean like that there's not even a, separation between oneness and separateness so that they're both real. Uni-duality, right? But non-duality when we're talking about it, and then we talk about neo-advaita, it's so hard to define these things. But I think when I say non-duality, and potentially when you're saying it in this context, I'm kind of talking about like that movement that just calls itself non-duality, as if they have the monopoly on what non-duality means per se, when in all these traditions they tend to point to something either subtly or very different using the word non-duality. And there are plenty of traditions that would call themselves non-dual that aren't based on negation. Like I think like Sufism and Kabbalah, a lot of those are very like humanity affirming and that kind of thing. But for me, like non-duality is like, and I mentioned a lot of the teachers that I followed, like Adyashanti, Rupert Spira. Then you can get like the more radical people, like, I didn't really get into them, but like the Tony Parsons and those folks that maybe some people call like radical non-duality. Um, but more of that kind of scene of like, I might sometimes refer to it as like the instant enlightenment. And for me, it was very much that kind of like direct path kind of thing, which was just kind of like, uh, you just need to have the realization now that whatever it is, you don't exist or you're pure consciousness or whatever. But that sort of, and might even call it like a YouTube phenomenon, because I feel like the majority of people that get into this stuff, at least in our maybe age range, YouTube is a big part of it. But so I don't know if that helps in any way to clarify, but I think like Neo-Advaita, which I was saying yesterday in our little chat, was like it's this mashup grab bag of like, because someone like Adyashanti's background is Zen Buddhism, but I would put him into Neo-Advaita because also I would say people like Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta Maharaj are two of probably the biggest influences of what we call Neo-Advaita. And so you can get a teacher like Adyashanti who's Zen Buddhist background, but will then like name drop Nisargadatta as a influence and things like that, where it's really that kind of like you are not a person is kind of central to it. Very much you are this and not that kind of thing. But I do think Neo-Advaita is kind of maybe marked more as like something that's highly decontextualized, where it's kind of divorced from all of the sort of traditional sort of aspects of it and context, but then kind of made into this thing that like should happen now, like right away, that sort of like instant shatter yourself into freedom kind of thing. But yeah, so I don't know if you want to clarify that any further, but it's good to say like what we mean by this.
Yeah, no, I think that covers it well. Yeah, so I'm glad we touched on that. And the other thing I wanted to make sure we touched on, which I think we've already done, but just to say it again, is that um, I think there's something to be said for not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and acknowledging that non-dual exploration for many people can have many liberating effects. And again, the way I see it is that these are another set of modes that you can play with. And it's kind of like ordinary human life. I also see every human drifting through a various range of modes of ways of relating to life. And in a way, what could be called awakening could just be said to be opening to a wider range of modes or exploring a wider range of modes so that you then understand a fuller sense of what is the smorgasbord of modes that are available here and how can I then integrate and find my natural flow and center of gravity. And maybe I discover things in some of these other modes that are extremely liberating that I didn't know about from my kind of ordinary human bandwidth. And so, yeah, I just wanted to make sure to make note of the liberating potential, and that I think a lot of my non-dual exploration, it was a necessary foundation for where I find myself now, which is a space again of feeling, really at home in life. And that fully includes feeling pain and feeling challenge and feeling grief and the full range of human emotions. So I'm not saying I'm like just blissed out all the time or something, but there's a huge difference when you really like trust life and you feel at home in life and you're like, whatever's arising is natural and I can trust this, I can be with this, I can let it be as it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you said that because I mean, I shared part of my story and what I would have called like liberating was definitely a big part of it. And yeah, the point of especially my work is not to, again, like I said, like these are all valid, they can be profound, they can be positive, they can be negative. But what I've kind of taken on as my work has been to bring balance to the portrayal of these types of non-dual, I guess, teachings, paths, and shifts in perception to bring in what's not discussed enough and what's not shown or seen enough, which is the shadow of it.
Yeah. And I think your work is super important. And that's why I was so excited to talk to you. And dialing a bit more in on the shadows, I think maybe it'd be cool for me to just I made a list of 9 significant shadows that I noticed. Maybe I'll just read these
Yeah,
now
please.
and you can tell me
I'd love
if there's any significant shadows that you would add to the list, or if you
yeah.
want to dive into any of these and expand on them. So, um, the first one would be and again, this is kind of more Neo-Advaita, or more radical forms of non-duality. The first one would be negating all value, purpose, importance, and meaning from life. So basically nihilism and just denying the
Yeah.
obvious formfulness, the juiciness, the lusciousness, the poetry, the richness, the sacramental human journeys that are obviously appearing here. And the second one, negating the world and the universe. So you often hear like there is no world, there is no universe, there is no body, there is no earth. So really fixating emptiness, like you say, fixating that side of the coin, we could say. Um, Third one, negating the sacramental journeys of embodied humanity that we're clearly on. Just kind of saying that that's all a dream or an illusion or just a character in a movie or a simulation. So, like you say, very dehumanizing. The fourth one would be negating stories, like just pretending that stories are just these stupid overlays that we just need to burn down and get rid of, rather than stories being really rich, incredibly mytho-poetic, archetypal technologies that are incredibly beautiful and sophisticated, and that we can fully own and play with and explore and find value in. The fifth one would be negating individuality, um, fixating on no self, just fixating on the annihilation of the individual, and rather than celebrating individuality and this, obvious reality that there is a psychophysical organism here and that it's radiating a certain unique ambiance that no other psychophysical organism is radiating, and that it's fun to play with that and celebrate that and express that. The sixth one is negating relationality and other people. So in the most extreme forms, this goes into solipsism, which I think is one of the biggest shadows and traps of radical non-duality. People get locked into believing their own family members don't exist, or being unsure if anyone is real, thinking that they're the only one in existence. And I mean, it's easy to see how that can be unbelievably lonely and life denying. Um, and yeah, for me, I feel like when the wholeness of what is really touches the heart, like the deeply felt intuition for me is like other people are completely real. They're completely real. And yeah, in a way I can see that as, I can see it as a valid mode to explore a mode of solipsism, and people might find liberation in that. But for me, my natural center of gravity is much more in the mode of this is all reality. This is all fully real. Um, I just have a couple more here. Seventh one, negating agency and participation. So there's this big emphasis on no free will, non-doership. And rather than seeing that as another valid mode, and it's valid to play with a mode of free will and creation, participation, agency, that's also a fully valid mode that is reality, experientially at least. And the eighth one here, claiming not to be a philosophy or belief system while smuggling in plenty of life-denying dogmas that inevitably do become internalized as beliefs. So that's one that I see a lot, just a claim that, oh, this is not a philosophy, this is just reality. When you just notice reality without philosophy, this is what you'll find. But then they smuggle in all sorts of like, oh, but there absolutely is no self, and there's absolutely no one here, and this is nothing, and this is absence. And then that inevitably becomes a dogma. And it's like, this is not
Yeah.
a story I would ever want to tell to my daughter, you know? This is like that's kind of a good litmus test for me. Like, is this something I would actually want to pass on to my children as a mythology, as a belief system? Because humans inevitably have these stories and belief systems, even if they can also see beyond the story. And the last one here is just creating subtle carrots on sticks of like all these mythical destinations on the ever receding horizon, the point at which you completely dissolve the self, or you melt into the absolute, or you ascend through all the jhanas and you attain final liberation or something like that. And all of this just plays on people's shame and not enoughness and just makes them feel like they're not there yet. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I'm here to kind of burn down is people's feeling that they're not there yet. Because I really think the most affirming message is we're all fully there right now. We're all fully reality right now. This is it. This is aliveness. Look around. It's celebrated. This is it. You're there. So yeah, so that was kind of my list. I'm curious if you'd add anything or want to zoom in on
Yeah.
any of those. Yeah.
So I think what you did there is really cool because the way I would see most of what you just listed, I would read those as the core features of the teachings. So they would not be able to acknowledge sorry, I don't like to do they, but like, you know, when you say negation of individuality, I certainly see that as a pitfall and a shadow, but that's a core tenet of it, right? So when I look at like the shadows, I tend to focus on absolutely what you said, but what are the negative adverse effects that negation can lead to? Because as you've said, that can also be liberating. Like the negation of the sense of physicality led me to some modes, as you said, that were completely blissful and anesthetizing and that sort of thing. At the same time, there is dissociation. So I would say like I like how what you did is calling out the shadows as actually the core features of the teachings. But so yeah, so for me, I would say you hit on definitely a lot of it. Like the nihilism has got to be like one of the number ones. And what's again scary to me is that a lot of those things are touted as positive, right? As like positive signs of progress is that you start to see that meaning is an illusion and that meaning is not necessary or that meaning is just another ego trip and all of those things. But you start to see how like the shadow side of that is that when people become that deeply nihilistic, they lose motivation to do anything. They start becoming very apathetic towards things in a way that can actually be dangerous. So there's definitely the nihilism, which also like launches many people into just extreme sense of depression because things that they used to care about don't matter anymore. And, you know, in some ways, things that maybe were trivial that they used to care about that trip them up and were unhealthy to fixate on things that were also beautiful and life-giving, like desire to create music and write poetry or, study science or whatever, you know what I mean? So I would say, there are a lot of shadows. I've got a pretty long list of them. I guess, you've touched on a lot of them. I would put solipsism in with the depersonalization, derealization, disassociation. There's always that conversation around like what's the difference between depersonalization and these sort of no self states. I think maybe we could save that for a different conversation, but harrowing experiences of dissociative states like those. Um, what else? You mentioned that about like the non-relationality and a way that that affects people's a lot of times it's disruptive in family settings, which you mentioned. I talk to a lot of people who end up with a lot of family issues and parenting issues because of this, sense that, their children or their partners, aren't really real. Therefore, like they sort of lose it, like you loses the juice, or they lose their motivation or their playfulness to engage with them and to really have empathy for them. And I think probably the one thing I'll say now, because there's so many of these shadow sides, one thing I'll say now is like a personal side effect that people can experience are some of the things that I think don't get talked about enough, which are like executive functioning impairment, where you've got memory issues, memory impairment, reduction in empathy. People can lose their sex drive, but things like that are actually, I think you'd be hard pressed to find many people who would say that like those are positive. Actually, that's not true, because a lot of times memory is positioned as the villain also. So there is a big sort of carrot dangled of like, well, if you can just stay in the present forever and, burn up your past and realize there is no past and no history, then, you're free. But what I would say is that, like, I think most people, like, before they go down that path, if somebody said, if you engage with this and you succeed in this awakening, you may end up having short-term memory problems. Most people wouldn't be like, yeah, let's go for it. You'd be like, okay, wait a minute. So these types of executive functioning issues, I just want to say very quickly, in all of the shadow sides and like negative effects that we're talking about, are things that are acknowledged by most non-dual teachers, just highly inconsistently. So it's not like these are unknown, it's that they're downplayed, they're often dismissed, or they're sort of like, if somebody experiences them, they're either sort of like, yeah, you'll get over it, just keep going, or it's sort of like, well, there's something wrong with you that you're experiencing that. But I just wanted to say that like I did a lot of exploration to reveal that in a lot of these, all of the most extreme Eastern traditions that were based on, especially these direct paths, where it's very much like there's no preparation and it's just all of a sudden your sense of self and world is meant to collapse permanently, that they were always talked about as the most risky and dangerous. And that's why there were, and I don't think we'll get there now, a lot of contextual safeguards in place there that we don't have today in the West. And so I just wanted to say that these shadow sides are acknowledged within traditions. It's gotten lost today. But just like to say that, if anyone's listening who might be experiencing some of these things, to know that like it's not like an anomaly or that you did something wrong kind of thing, or something to be ashamed of. So just, yeah, that was all I was going to say just for now, because I could go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I'd love to do a part two sometime because it feels like we
Yeah,
could
I would
easily.
like to do one where I can actually, because I'm holding myself back from asking you questions. So maybe a round two where I can hear about your story.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. And so I guess drawing to a close for today, I wanted to ask you if you could share one message with the audience and with the whole world in this moment. What would it be?
Wow. I think I'll just go with like what came up first with my gut was just like for people who are feeling drawn to self-negating non-duality, for either like, let's say mainly for like the liberating effects that are dangled, or because they want to experience something maybe that they would describe as like mystical or oneness or that kind of thing. Just to say that you don't have to lose yourself to experience those things. That what's being offered to you is a partial experience, and something that is maybe described as oneness, but it's a type of oneness. It's one type of oneness, let's say, for example. And that, um, yeah, I think maybe that's it right there, is just to say that if you are somebody who feels like you're longing for something called oneness, that what self-negating non-duality teaches is oneness is not the sort of monopoly on what a oneness experience can be, and that there's a different way to experience unity or oneness that involves like you and me and all of us getting to experience our oneness at the same time, that like we get to experience that as beautiful, unique individuals. And, maybe to encourage people to do maybe a bit more exploration around what's out there in terms of spiritual paths and spiritual traditions, and that, the things that you expect to gain from self-negating non-duality, a lot of that you can also get in other pathways that don't deny the self, that don't deny the reality of the world, and that I think a lot of people will find, if they look into it, will seem a lot healthier, more balanced, and more whole in a way. And so that way, just to be able to say to people, like you said, to open up a sense of choice, like don't feel pressured by non-dual speakers or teachers or communities, that this is the only way and any other way is just the ego or whatever. Like, and don't feel pressured that you have to like jump into something like, ego death pointers right away. Like, it's okay to question it. It's okay to take some time to like evaluate where you're at in life. If now is a good time to do something that's super ungrounding, if this is really what you want, or if you just want to be free from suffering, so you're doing what someone tells you, and to just really be aware that everything that I would say self-negating non-duality points to as something positive and freeing has a shadow side. So please do listen to folks who have been through it and are sharing that, so that you have a better understanding of sort of the double-edged sword nature of it, and then make your informed decision, if that makes sense.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you. And where can people find more about your work if they would like to?
Well, it's the Glorious Both And. So there's the gloriousbothand.com, which needs to be revamped, but the Glorious Both And YouTube, Substack, maybe we can throw those links into the description. But yeah, I will say that on my Substack blog, where I post most regularly is in the notes section, which is kind of more of like a short form blog feed. So if you want to like engage with me also there, I'm often engaging in like the comments on the Substack notes. So
Hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, I love your Substack notes, and I'll link all that stuff. So, yeah, just want to say thank you so much. It was great to
thank you.
meet you and
Thank
talk
you
to you
for
today.
having me.
Yeah. Take good care, and yeah, look forward to more in the future.